We have explicitly anti-trans sports organization here in Minnesota go around the country pushing these anti-trans sports bills.
It's meant to reinforce rigid notions of gender, who is and isn't a girl or a woman. The victims of trans inclusion in sports are cisgender women and girls, and
I got a response back from Erin. I took a look at some of your videos on YouTube. I can't in good conscience appear on your page and engage in an interview. If Floyd Mayweather identified as a woman, should he be allowed to compete against other female boxers?
Yes. Dude, kill someone.
Okay, that's how I feel about
it. It is going to be open and inclusive to you no matter who you are.
I was working on a new interview project and it's shut down. My next project was to interview Erin Maye Quade. She's a senator in Minnesota. She's also the lead of special projects for the Gender Justice nonprofit. And you can see that on their website, they are very excited about the future of Minnesota having zero gender barriers, which includes female sports.
Trans inclusion increases participation rates in girls and women's sports. If you know that the thing that you participate in is open and inclusive to all people, you can go into it knowing that it is going to be open and inclusive to you no matter who you are.
Gender Justice is the group that helped J.C. Cooper win this lawsuit. The verdict will ensure that any women's sports organization in Minnesota has to allow someone who is biologically male identifying as female to compete against women, or they will get sued and fined, just like USA Powerlifting.
They have 14 days from the date of that ruling to give the court a new policy that is trans inclusive. What that ruling says is you cannot bar trans women from women's sports in the state. And so that's important. This is not like a powerlifting specific ruling.
I got a response back from Erin, and I want to show the email. I took a look at some of your videos on YouTube. I can't in good conscience appear on your page and engage in an interview about JC. I encourage you to check out some videos on Gender Justice's page related to trans inclusion in sports. I imagine many of your questions would be answered. Thanks again for reaching out. I wish you all the best.
Hug, hug. Geese, geese.
So I don't expect to get a second response, but the way that I answered this email, do you have any thoughts on this question? If Floyd Mayweather identified as a woman, should he be allowed to box against biological women? This is the central question for my street interviews in the Twin Cities that did 500,000 views and over 4,000 comments. I'm familiar with Gender Justice's podcast and know you haven't been asked this specific question before. The views on that video alone would put me in the top tier of journalist groups in Minnesota. The Star Tribune is the biggest news channel that we have in Minnesota, and that's about 9 million impressions per month. The Star Tribune has come up with a very clear bias that they are actually in favor of forcing biological women to compete against biological men identifying as a woman. They collaborated with the head Lynx basketball coach, Cheryl Reeve, in order to make that point.
You know, we had Cheryl Reeve, who actually just finished an op-ed for congratulating JC, so making sure we had folks just talking about how much they support her and support trans inclusion in sports more broadly.
That article had 166 comments, which is pretty high engagement on a Star Tribune article. And the overwhelming majority of those comments were people saying that they disagree with Cheryl Reeve and they disagree with the direction of Minnesota continuing to force biological women to compete against biological men. Here's one comment with 36 upvotes. I have coached male and female athletes at the high school level my whole career. If you don't believe men are faster, stronger, bigger than women, you are crazy. I do not want my wonderful granddaughter sitting on the bench when a guy has taken their place in the lineup. Don't send the women's movement back 50 years by implementing this nonsensical argument. The Star Tribune does not reach people only in the conservative camp. The impression that I get from Minnesota is that the vast majority of people across political aisles actually still believe that women's sports should be separate from biological men competing in them. So that's the poll that I'm going off of. You can question my data. That's fine.
This was like a ginned up controversy by anti-LGBTQ hate groups. The question of should trans people be able to compete in sports that align with their gender identity had been asked and answered a long time ago. Asked, answered, and settled. And trying to hammer that home was a large part of our work too.
We have explicitly anti-trans sports organization here in Minnesota go around the country pushing these anti-trans sports bills, testifying at other state legislators where they don't participate in youth sports, don't have kids who participate in youth sports. They're just that committed to being transphobic and terrible.
It's meant to reinforce rigid notions of gender, who is and isn't a girl or a woman, who is threatening and dangerous and who's not.
Just if you think basic biology between men and women there's a difference, and so women's sports ought to be separate. Believing that alone gets you the anti-LGBTQ hate medal and award. Also, Senator Quade, one message I would like to send to you comes from Madison Canadien. She's a track athlete in Idaho. She has experience with competing against biological men. Maybe you should listen to her story.
I learned that a male athlete would be allowed to compete in the women's cross-country and track events for my conference. With an open mind, I competed in my first race against this biological male. I got left in the dust. Along with hundreds of other females, I competed 4 more times against this athlete. Each time, I found myself displaced, frustrated, and deflated. To protect a fair playing field for female athletes like me, Idaho passed the Fairness in Women's Sports Act. The law simply relies on what science tells us about the differences between men and women. It's there to keep female athletes from paying the price of ignoring biological reality.
Eastwood used to run in men's competitions for Montana and won only 2 races out of 56 in 3 years of competition. Never even qualified for the national meet. Once he started competing in the women's division, he beat Jenny Simpson's collegiate record in the 1500, which was unchallenged for a decade, and he beat it by almost 10 seconds. Senator Quade, would Madison Canien's content also disturb your moral conscience? Is she also to be lumped into the category of anti-LGBTQ hate? I've never heard the Gender Justice podcast bring up data that cross-compares the female to male world record performance. The Atlantic published this data, and they have a track record of favoring candidates from the Democratic Party. And that data shows that women perform 90% as well as men in 12 different running and swimming events. Senator Quade, in case you didn't know already, I would like to inform you about the story of Avi Silverberg. Avi is a male powerlifting coach, and Avi decided to identify as a woman to compete in powerlifting in Alberta, Canada. All you needed to provide was a passport that stated that you were female. You can immediately compete with no testosterone blockers of any kind. Truly, the most inclusive you can be. Avi crushed a weightlifting record, not of a biological woman, but of a biological male identifying as a woman by 100 pounds.
Somebody did show up at the meet today with malicious intent. Maybe my participation isn't necessarily fair. I mean, there's science, whatever. But people welcome me because I'm actually nice to people.
It's very easy for senators like Erin Maye Quade to hide behind a press wall where nobody asks her any difficult questions on this issue. I would love to ask you what you think about Avi Silverberg.
The Minnesota High School League became officially fully trans inclusive. We actually saw participation rates in girls' sports rise during that time period. It hasn't brought about the end of women's sports by any means, right?
I don't believe that women's sports will cease to exist if you have trans women in them. What you have is an overtaking of the podium. You have scholarships being taken away. So you have people who fight for the top positions, for the top places in these sports, and those opportunities are now going to men rather than women. In combat sports like MMA and boxing, people are legitimately concerned that it is dangerous for women to have to compete against biological men.
There's too much of an advantage for her to fight against women. And I really stress that I am for Fallon, for her moral choices, for her life choices, that's fine. But it's a thin line when you want to play contact sports with the opposite sex.
To anybody out there who's a fellow Minnesotan, if you have a daughter in sports, your daughter in Minnesota will be forced to compete against men, and Senator Quade does not give a damn about that. That is the truth. I don't think it will change her mind, but if you want to help me out a little bit, feel free to drop Erin a note here and let her know what you think. Forward this question to her. If Floyd Mayweather identified as a woman, should he be allowed to box against biological women? I'd love to see her answer that.
It is going to be open and inclusive to you no matter who you are.
Yeah! If she's not going to answer me, maybe she'll answer one of you sending an email. Yeah!